Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
After 3 years of working from home as a customer service agent for a major tech company, I've mastered the art of quick grocery runs between calls. My job involves talking to people all day about their device problems, so I've developed pretty thick skin when it comes to dealing with difficult customers. But nothing in my customer service experience could have prepared me for what happened last week. My morning had been quite rough. Back-to-back calls with frustrated customers had left me mentally drained, and I was desperately looking forward to my lunch break. With only 30 minutes until my next shift and an empty pantry at home, I decided to make a quick run to the grocery store around the corner. I threw on my comfy blue hoodie, the one I practically live in during my work-from-home days, paired it with some old jeans and my beat-up sneakers, and headed out. The store was relatively quiet for a weekday afternoon, which was exactly what I needed. No lines, no chaos, just me and my mission to grab some snacks to fuel my afternoon shift. I was in the chips aisle, debating between salt and vinegar or classic barbecue, when I heard it. A cough. Not a natural cough, but one of those attention-seeking coughs people do when they want you to notice them. I ignored it at first, too focused on my snack dilemma. The cough came again, louder and more aggressive this time. Thinking someone might actually need help, I turned around. There stood this woman, probably in her mid-60s, with perfectly coiffed gray hair. She snapped at me, demanding to know if I always ignored customers like this, claiming she'd been trying to get my attention for 5 minutes. I politely explained that I didn't work there, but she wasn't having any of it. She looked me up and down with such intensity, you'd think she was trying to detect whether I was lying through some kind of visual lie detector. She accused me of lying, saying she'd seen me walking around the store and insisted I must be on my break. She demanded that I help her find the sugar aisle. I repeated, still trying to be polite, that I really didn't work there and was just shopping. She scoffed and called me lazy, demanding to speak to my manager. I had to explain again that I didn't have a manager there because I wasn't an employee. I suggested that one of the actual store employees would be happy to help her find the sugar. She stormed off, yelling something about lazy kids these days having no work ethic. I went back to my chip selection, finally settling on both flavors. After that encounter, I deserved it. I was at the self-checkout scanning my items when I heard the clicking of her heels approaching again. This time she had a store manager in tow, a tired-looking man wearing the actual store uniform with a name tag and everything. She immediately pointed at me, accusing me of refusing to help her and lying about working there. The manager calmly explained that I didn't work there, pointing out that he'd never seen me before and that their employees wear store-branded polo shirts and khakis, not hoodies. She spluttered in protest, saying I had been walking around like I owned the place. The manager simply pointed out that was because I was shopping, like any other customer. Still not backing down, she insisted that I should have helped her anyway, claiming it was just common courtesy. That's when I pointed out that, as someone who actually works in customer service, just not here, demanding help from random shoppers and accusing them of lying wasn't exactly courteous behavior either. The manager tried to hide his smirk as her face turned red. A few other customers who had gathered to watch the scene unfold started chuckling. The manager offered to show her to the sugar aisle, but instead of accepting, she demanded to speak to the district manager, calling the situation unacceptable. The manager asked her to clarify if she really wanted to file a complaint because a customer who didn't work there wouldn't help her find something. The absurdity of her demand finally seemed to sink in. She looked around at the amused faces of other shoppers, clutched her purse tightly, and practically ran toward the exit, leaving behind a full shopping cart. The manager turned to me with an apologetic smile and shared that this kind of thing happens at least once a week. I told him I could believe it, adding that while I deal with difficult people over the phone all day, at least they can't follow me around demanding to see my manager. I finished checking out, grabbed my bags, and headed home, making it back just in time for my next shift. I'd spent years perfecting my customer service voice and demeanor only to be accosted for it while off duty. 6 months ago, I received a diagnosis that felt like being handed both a lifeline and a ticking clock. Early stage amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. The early catch was a strange gift, enough time to brace myself for the storm ahead, yet it came with the cruel knowledge that I would be watching my body betray me, muscle by muscle, all while my mind remained painfully sharp. I used to be a high school teacher, but I had to step down when my speech started becoming slightly slurred. I didn't want my students to struggle to understand their lessons. These days, I mostly focus on my treatment and managing my symptoms. Some days are better than others, and last Tuesday was definitely one of the worst ones. I needed to pick up some groceries, and usually, my sister helps me with this kind of stuff. But she was out of town for work, and I didn't want to bother anyone else. I figured I could handle a small grocery run on my own. Big mistake. I was doing okay at first, using a basket instead of a cart since I wasn't buying much. But about halfway through my shopping, my arms started getting weaker, one of the lovely symptoms of my condition. The basket was becoming unbearably heavy, and I spotted a woman nearby who seemed to be just browsing the cereal aisle. I politely asked her if she could help carry my basket to the checkout, explaining that my arms were giving out. She looked me up and down with suspicion and told me that I looked perfectly fine to her. I tried explaining that I had a medical condition affecting my muscle strength and just needed a little help. She responded with contempt, accusing me of being like all the other people she supposedly sees, who pretend to be sick just to get others to do things for them. She called it pathetic. I attempted to tell her about my ALS, but she interrupted me mid-sentence, mockingly repeating, amyotrophic lateral what now? She accused me of Googling some fancy disease to make my story more believable. By this point, other shoppers were starting to stare, but nobody intervened yet. She went on a rant about being sick of lazy people like me taking advantage of kind people, declaring that I was what's wrong with society. Then she grabbed my shopping basket, but instead of helping me, she held it away from me. She demanded that I prove my condition, saying that if I could talk, I could walk, and I could certainly carry my own basket. My arms were trembling at this point, and I could feel my legs getting weaker. Stress always makes my symptoms worse. I quietly asked her to give back my groceries, telling her I didn't need to prove anything to her. That's when she pulled out her phone and started recording. She announced to her phone that she was exposing another faker trying to scam people into doing her work for her, and told me to say hi to social media with a condescending sweetheart. I was trying not to cry at this point when I heard a familiar voice behind me. It was the store manager asking what was going on. Turns out one of the employees had recognized me. I used to teach her daughter at the high school. She'd already called security and explained the situation. The woman immediately started shouting that she was exposing me, claiming I was pretending to be sick to manipulate people. The manager told her that she knew me personally, explaining that I was a former teacher who had to retire due to my ALS diagnosis. She ordered the woman to put down her phone and return my basket immediately. The woman scoffed and accused us all of being in on it together, threatening to call the police. The manager calmly encouraged her to do so, stating they would show the police their security footage of her harassing a disabled customer and stealing groceries. The woman defended herself, insisting she wasn't stealing anything, but rather preventing a scammer from taking advantage of people. The police arrived pretty quickly. Apparently, another customer had called them too when they saw what was happening. The woman had live-streamed the whole thing on her social media, providing perfect evidence of her harassment. When the police asked her to stop recording and return my groceries, she refused and went on a rant about her rights as a citizen to expose social parasites. That's when they arrested her for harassment and disorderly conduct. Turns out she also had a history of similar incidents at other stores. The video went viral, but not the way she intended. My former students recognized me and flooded the comments with stories about how I'd helped them over the years. The local ALS support group I'm part of also chimed in, turning the whole thing into an awareness campaign about invisible disabilities. The store ended up delivering my groceries for free, and they've since implemented a new assistance program for customers with disabilities. The woman got banned from the store chain and had to take down all her social media accounts after the backlash. Last I heard, she's facing charges for harassment and got fired from her job after her employer saw the video. I wish I could say this was the first time someone didn't believe me about my condition, but it was definitely the most dramatic. At least some good came out of it. The store's new assistance program has helped a lot of people, and the incident sparked important conversations about invisible disabilities in our community. After working in real estate for 15 years, my spouse and I thought we knew everything about housing communities. We'd helped countless clients navigate the murky waters of homeowners associations, but nothing prepared us for what we were about to experience ourselves. We'd moved to Tampa for my spouse's job promotion. The community seemed perfect on paper. Maintenance-free living, which meant no weekends spent mowing lawns under the scorching Florida sun. The monthly fee of $238 seemed reasonable for the service. Oh, how wrong we were. The problem started almost immediately after moving in. Our yard looked like it had been through a war zone. Every time it rained, which was often in Florida, our lawn would turn into a swamp. The drainage was absolutely terrible. But that wasn't even the worst part. The lawn maintenance company they contracted was a joke. These guys would show up with their mowers even when the grass was soaking wet. I tried to stop them one day, telling them they couldn't mow when the ground was completely saturated. The worker just brushed me off, saying he was just doing his job and it was on the schedule. When I pointed out that they were creating huge ruts in the yard, he simply told me to take it up with the homeowners association. And take it up with them I did. Every single month I'd attend their meetings. I would tell them how our yard was deteriorating and that the drainage issues needed to be addressed. The board president would give me the same response every time, claiming they understood my concerns, but fixing drainage systems wasn't in their current budget. When I asked what exactly my $238 monthly fee was paying for, they would simply reply that it was for maintenance services as outlined in my contract. This went on for 5 years. 5 years. We tried selling the house after the first year. We knew this wasn't the right neighborhood for us. But every potential buyer would take one look at our yard and run the other way. The real estate agent would tell us that while our house was priced right and the interior was beautiful, there was an issue. I didn't even need to guess. It was the yard. They confirmed that the curb appeal was really hurting our chances. I kept detailed records of every complaint, every meeting, every email. The homeowners association probably had an entire filing cabinet dedicated to my communications. Finally, after what felt like my 1,000th complaint, they cracked. The board secretary told me that the board had approved replacing our sod. When I asked about the drainage issues, they made it clear they would only be replacing the sod. I smiled and thanked them, knowing what was coming next. They had no idea I'd already contracted a company to install pavers over most of the lawn. I watched with barely contained glee as they spent thousands installing new sod. 3 weeks later, the paver company arrived. The board president showed up demanding to know what was going on. I casually told them I was just making some landscaping improvements. When they insisted I couldn't do this without approval, I told them that I had checked the bylaws very carefully and pavers were explicitly permitted as long as they met certain specifications, which these did. 2 months later, we sold the house for double what we'd paid for it. The new owners loved the pavers, and the minimal lawn meant they wouldn't have to deal with the homeowners association's incompetent maintenance company. When we were moving out, I ran into the board president one last time. They tried to make me feel guilty, saying they hoped I realized how much money they had wasted on the new sod. I simply responded that I did realize, and they should consider it partial repayment for the 5 years of fees I paid for services they failed to properly provide. I heard later through our old neighbors that the homeowners association had to raise their monthly fees to cover the cost of the sod replacement. But by then, we were long gone, living in a beautiful house with no homeowners association in sight. Sometimes the best revenge is simply playing by their rules, and then using those same rules to beat them. at their own game. I'm a surgical resident, and after finishing medical school, I was thrilled to find an apartment close to the hospital where I work. The rent was reasonable, the location was perfect, and the building seemed quiet. Exactly what I needed given my crazy schedule of 12 to 16-hour shifts. Everything was great for the first month until my next-door neighbor moved in. From day one, he made it clear that consideration for others wasn't his strong suit. The first night, his music was so loud that my walls were literally vibrating. I politely went over to ask if he could turn down the music, explaining that I had an early shift the next day. He just laughed it off, telling me it was only 11 p.m. and that I should live a little. When I tried to explain that I had to be up at 4 a.m. for work and needed to be well rested as a surgical resident, he dismissively told me it wasn't his problem and suggested I get earplugs. That was just the beginning. Every single night without fail, the bass would start thumping around 10 p.m. and wouldn't stop until 2 or 3 in the morning. I tried everything: earplugs, white noise machines, noise-canceling headphones. Nothing worked. The vibrations from his speakers were too powerful. I filed complaints with the building management. When I spoke with them, they said they'd send him a warning letter. After the third warning letter in 2 weeks with no changes, I went back to complain again. The building manager just shrugged and said that unless multiple residents complained, there wasn't much else they could do. I even called the police twice, but by the time they arrived, he temporarily lowered the volume, only to crank it back up once they left. My performance at work was starting to suffer. I nearly dozed off during rounds one morning, which could have been dangerous for my patients. Then came the final straw. I overheard him in the hallway bragging to his friend about an upcoming party he was planning. He was excitedly telling his friend about his new subwoofer installation, boasting that the whole building would feel it. That's when I decided enough was enough. I had the next day off, so I spent it preparing. I downloaded every annoying sound I could find: emergency vehicle sirens, crying babies, car alarms, dogs barking, and even that horrible vuvuzela sound from the 2010 World Cup. I created a continuous loop of these sounds and connected my phone to my most powerful Bluetooth speaker. The night of his party arrived, and as expected, the music was deafening. Around midnight, when the party was at its peak, I positioned my speaker right against our shared wall and hit play. He started pounding on my door, yelling at me to turn off what he called that garbage. I shouted back that I couldn't hear him over all the noise. He became increasingly frustrated, complaining that his guests were leaving. I mockingly asked if the noise was bothering him, suggesting that he might want to try some earplugs, throwing his own words back at him. His party guests were howling with laughter at this point, and several of them were recording the whole thing on their phones. One guest shouted that he'd just got served, while another excitedly announced they were posting this straight to social media. My neighbor tried to silence everyone, insisting it wasn't funny. That's when I reminded him how hilarious he thought it was when I begged him to let me sleep before my hospital shifts. The next day, he actually came to apologize. He admitted he'd been a jerk and asked if we could start over. I agreed, but made it clear that if he ever blasted his music again, I'd respond with my special playlist, adding that I had plenty of free time to find more annoying sounds. He got the message. These days, I can barely hear his music through the walls, and when I do ask him to turn it down, he complies immediately. Sometimes the best way to deal with entitled people is to give them a taste of their own medicine. Those party videos did end up on social media, and now whenever he has friends over, they tease him about it. Nothing like public humiliation to teach someone some manners. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.